In Tower Defense Simulator, event towers are limited time towers only available by beating the seasonal event or just hoping the tower will eventually go on sale as a game pass. So today I'll be ranking all 12 event towers to determine how good they actually are. Also, please consider subscribing to help my undying addiction to a LEGO game. Anyways, starting off the list as the absolute worst event tower is the Frost Blaster. The Frost Blaster is an event tower obtained from beating the Xmas 2019 event. Despite being the rarest tower in the game, it is very lacking. The Frost Blaster's freezing mechanic is extremely short. It can only freeze an enemy for only 0.35 seconds for the first 3 levels, and its freezing maxes out at 0.7 seconds at max level. Meanwhile, comparing it to the Sledger tower, another freezing support tower, it can slow down enemies for 2 seconds straight, as well as being able to freeze multiple enemies at once, as opposed to Frost Blaster's singular targeting. Along with that, the Frost Blaster is super overpriced for the amount of damage it does. It's only capable of outputting 23 DPS for a whopping $12,000. Overall, if you ever plan to use the Frost Blaster, I don't know why, I suggest spamming level 3, as it is the most cost efficient level, but I would still put Frost Blaster as an F tier tower, because it's completely outclassed by the Sledger in every way, and it's just a waste of a tower slot. Right after the Frost Blaster, coming in 11th place is the Slasher. The Slasher tower is obtainable by beating the Halloween 2019 event. It is meant for early to mid-game use, as it costs $400 to place, and only 5.8k cash to max. However, the main problem with the Slasher is that it struggles in early game, which is meant to be the Slasher's strength. At level 0, it only deals 3 damage, which isn't able to one-shot normal enemies in multi-mode. Coupled with its extremely small range and slow fire rate, the Slasher faces early game challenges. However, the tower does offer decent value for its cost, providing 28 DPS for only 5,800 cash, which is actually 2 times better value than the Frost Blaster. But it's still important to note that the Slasher gains the knife throwing ability at level 2, which significantly boosts its damage output. At max level, this ability buffs the Slasher's DPS from 28 to a staggering 43 DPS for the same 5.8k cast. Despite this seemingly good cost to value ratio, the Slasher is still outperformed. Towers like Gladiator, Shotgunner, and even Demo Man surpass it in early game, mid game, and certainly in late game stages, as those towers have piercing, which allows them to completely outclass Slasher's single targeting. Combining the Slasher's early game struggles and the insignificance of 28 DPS in the late game, it renders the tower somewhat ineffective. So for those who intend on using the Slasher, only focus on spamming level 2 Slashers for early game, as it grants a knife throwing ability and has hidden detection, making it moderately effective at dealing with hordes of enemies. Still, I believe the Slasher belongs to D tier overall, as it is still very outclassed for Gladiator, for example. After the Slasher tower, we're followed by another OG event tower, that being the Commando tower, ranking 10th overall. What was once the strongest tower in the entire game is just looked upon as a joke now. The Commando tower is very expensive, costing 1,600 cash to place and only dealing 4 DPS, making it only usable for mid to late game. At max level, the Commando costs 22,150 cash, which is comparable to the regular mini's cost of 20,000, but unlike the minigunner, the Commando only deals a depressingly low 43 DPS compared to the minigunner's 92 DPS. While the Commando does unlock missiles at level 2, at max level the missiles only deal 7 DPS, and the tower is currently broken, so the missiles usually miss anyways due to the launching animations. So overall, this tower is basically just a worse minigunner that doesn't have hidden detection. So I'll rank it a C- tier, right in between being average and being complete garbage. After the Commando tower, we have one of the latest event towers to be released, that being the Necromancer at 9th place overall. Now this opinion might be controversial, but the Necromancer is way too overpriced. The tower costs 2,225 cash to place, which makes it bad for early game. Additionally, it only does 5 DPS at level 0, which isn't great at all, and the tower has a very low placement limit of only 3 Necromancers. The tower is meant to be a late game tower based on its max price of $45,000, but at late game it is way too weak. The Necromancer itself only deals 50 DPS at max, but up to 200 DPS on hordes of enemies, but hordes of enemies shouldn't even be a threat in the game, if you just use towers such as Accelerator or Engineer, which are not only good at dealing with hordes, they can also completely shred bosses. Meanwhile, 12 Necromancers couldn't even kill all the Fallen Guardians in Fallen mode. And to put the nail in the coffin of Necromancer, the skeletons that it spawns aren't even guaranteed. You could be completely screwed over by the Necromancer spawning in a bunch of skeleton knights when you desperately need an executioner skeleton. The combination of the Necromancer's overpricedness and unreliability scores it a C- tier. Very disappointing for a tower that costs 1.8k gems. After the disappointment that was the Necromancer tower, in 8th place, we have the Swarmer tower. Now the Swarmer recently got a bug fix that heavily nerfed it. Before the bug fix, after shooting an enemy once, it would shoot a different enemy, but now the Swarmer repeatedly shoots the same enemy. And since the beast's attack doesn't stack anymore, it does a painfully low 16 DPS at max. Before the bug fix, the Swarmer was so OP that it could literally kill the Void Reaver all by itself. Although, I suggest if you use this tower to set on random so the Swarmer doesn't repeatedly hit the same enemy for no extra damage. So if you set it to random, I think the Swarmer could be a C tier tower, but it's still nothing amazing. After the Bee Swarmer, in 7th place is the Archer. After the Archer rework, I think the tower is just average. The Archer has a decent DPS of 20, plus the 10 extra DPS from fire arrows. In total, the Archer could do 210 DPS if 7 enemies are perfectly lined up. However, the Archer is very map dependent, which makes it pretty bad in certain maps, while performing about average on maps with straight lines. Overall, I think the Archer is deserving of a B- tier, as sometimes it can do amazing DPS, but usually you'll only hit one enemy, depending on the map. Now we reach the halfway point of the event towers tier list. So coming in 6th place is the Toxic Gunner. The Toxic Gunner is pretty decent. It's like the Soldier, but has a poison and slowdown effect too. If you use the tower, I suggest setting it to random as well as spamming level 3 due to its drastically increased fire rate and DPS. Along with its decent DPS, it can slow down enemies by 20%, making it a decent support option too. Additionally, the Toxic Gunner is also super cheap, only costing 8,500 cash to max, while doing a DPS of 26. Although, if you set Toxic Gunner to random, it can do 36 DPS, as the poison effect will be spread onto 10 zombies instead of only shooting 1 zombie. Overall, this tower is good at early game defense, and can also be used as a support tower for mid to late game enemies, such as a tank, so I'd rank it a B tier overall. After the Toxic Gunner, in 5th place we have another Halloween event tower, that being the Executioner. The Executioner has the potential to be an A tier tower, but due to the inconsistency of the axe targeting, sometimes the axe can be extremely OP and deal hundreds of DPS, when sometimes it can only hit one enemy and do like no damage. But overall, it's one of the best crowd control options. The only problem is the inconsistency and how hidden detection is locked at level 4. However though, I'd still rank it a B+ tier because it's very good at killing hordes. In 4th place is the Sledger Tower. The Sledger Tower is the second best stunning tower in the entire game. It can completely freeze enemies for 2 seconds straight, as well as slow down multiple enemies at once. Additionally, it does 2 times more damage when an enemy is frozen at level 4 or higher, making it have an incredibly high DPS. It can do over 300 DPS at max level if it hits 4 enemies that are already frozen. This tower easily deserves an A tier. I wouldn't say it's an S tier due to most enemies having a freeze immunity, but it's still good. In 3rd place is the Elf Camp. The Elf Camp is a spawner tower that can spawn in multiple units such as the Ripped Elf, Slay Elves, and Guardian Elves. It is extremely OP. 2 max Elf Camps only cost 30k in total, but it can almost completely solo Molten Mode by itself, which is very impressive. While the tower is kind of held back by its placement limit of 2, it is a very strong tower, deserving of an A+ tier due to the Elf Camp being disadvantaged on multi-laned maps and shorter maps, so it's just barely out of S tier. Now we reach the top 2 event towers, the Jester and the Gladiator. The Gladiator has been consistently the best event tower for a long time. Will it finally be dethroned by the Jester? Well, the answer is yes. Gladiator has been dethroned as the best event tower. So recently, the Gladiator was nerfed to where its infinite pierce was limited to a maximum of 3. This greatly weakened the Gladiator, but it's still the best tower for speedrunning game modes. However, I feel like the Jester is more versatile. The Jester is significantly cheaper than the Gladiator. It's able to hit more enemies at once, and it even has special abilities such as Confusion, Poison, and Freezing. The Freezing and Confusion bomb cause major bosses such as a Fallen King to be slowed down by 50%. or making them move backwards, which is absolutely absurd. Additionally, the Jester can throw down poison on the map, which deals a lot of damage to enemies. Even more in Jester's favor, he's extremely good at early game defense, even comparable to Gladiator. Jester currently is just by far the best event tower in the game. He has early game capabilities of Gladiator, with the stunning capabilities of Sledger, and he's just as cheap as Toxic Gunner. This tower is 100% going to get nerfed, so use it while you can.